There comes a moment that almost every healthcare student experiences, but very few people talk about openly. It's the moment you walk out of an examination hall convinced you've done enough, only to discover the results tell a completely different story. What's even more confusing is this. You know you're intelligent. Your classmates know you're intelligent. Your lecturers have seen your potential. Yet somehow, the grades don't reflect the effort you've been putting in. How is that possible? If intelligence alone determined success in medical school, the smartest students would always graduate at the top of their class. But that's not what happens in reality. Every year, brilliant students repeat courses. Highly intelligent students struggle during clinical postings. People who were top of their class in secondary school suddenly find themselves barely passing exams. Meanwhile, someone who never considered themselves exceptionally gifted seems to thrive. So, what makes the difference? The answer might surprise you. Medical school doesn't simply test how much you know. It tests how well you can think, how consistently you can learn, how effectively you can adapt, and how resilient you are when things don't go according to plan. Many students enter medical school believing that what helped them succeed before will continue to work. They rely on reading the same notes repeatedly. They memorize pages of information the night before an exam. They spend hours highlighting textbooks until every page is covered in bright colors. They feel productive because they're studying for long hours. But spending 10 hours with a book isn't the same as learning for 10 hours. One of the biggest misconceptions in medical education is confusing time spent studying with actual learning. Think about it this way. If someone spends 5 hours in a gym but never exercises properly, will they become stronger? Of course not. Simply being in the gym doesn't build muscle. The quality of the workout matters far more than the time spent there. Studying medicine works in much the same way. Your brain isn't impressed by how long you've been sitting at a desk. It's shaped by how actively you engage with what you're learning. Reading the same paragraph 10 times might make it look familiar, but familiarity isn't understanding. Many students mistake recognition for mastery. You read a page and think, I know this. Then the exam asks the same concept in a slightly different way, and suddenly everything disappears. Why? Because recognizing information and recalling information are completely different mental processes. Recognition is easy because the answer is right in front of you. Recall is much harder because your brain has to retrieve the information without any clues. And that's exactly what medical exams, and even more importantly, clinical practice, demand. Imagine standing beside a patient's bed. The patient tells you they've had chest pain for the past 2 hours. There isn't a textbook floating in front of your face. There aren't highlighted notes to guide you. You must retrieve knowledge from memory, connect different concepts, and make sense of the situation. That's why medicine isn't just about storing facts. It's about building connections. When you truly understand a concept, you don't have to memorize every single sentence. Instead, one idea naturally leads to another. Take inflammation, for example. Instead of memorizing every sign separately, you understand that tissue injury triggers the release of chemical mediators. Those chemicals cause blood vessels to widen, increasing blood flow, which explains the redness and warmth. They also make blood vessels more permeable, allowing fluid to leak into tissues, which causes swelling. The same chemicals stimulate pain receptors, leading to pain. Once you understand the process, the individual signs begin to make perfect sense. That's the kind of thinking medicine rewards. Unfortunately, many students never make that transition. They collect facts without connecting them. They memorize lists without understanding relationships. They prepare for exams instead of preparing to become clinicians. And over time, that approach becomes exhausting. Another reason smart students struggle is perfectionism. Perfectionism sounds like a strength, but in medical school, it often becomes a hidden weakness. Some students refuse to move on until they understand every tiny detail of one topic. They spend 3 days trying to master a single chapter, while dozens of other topics continue piling up. Others rewrite their notes again and again, believing they aren't neat enough. Some spend hours creating beautiful summaries that they never actually revise. It feels productive, but it isn't always effective. Medicine is simply too vast for perfection. The goal isn't to know absolutely everything. The goal is to build understanding steadily, revisit concepts regularly, and improve over time. The students who succeed aren't necessarily the ones who know the most on day one. They're usually the ones who keep showing up, keep learning from mistakes, and keep improving, even when progress feels slow. Another trap intelligent students often fall into is being afraid of making mistakes. When you've always been known as the smart one, failure feels personal. A poor test score doesn't just feel like a bad result. It feels like proof that you're no longer intelligent. But that's one of the most dangerous beliefs you can carry into medical school, because mistakes aren't evidence that you can't become a great healthcare professional. They're evidence that you're learning something difficult. Every experienced doctor, nurse, pharmacist, physiotherapist, or surgeon you admire today has answered questions incorrectly, misunderstood concepts, forgotten information, and made countless mistakes during training. The difference is that they use those mistakes as feedback instead of treating them as a final judgment on their ability. One of the biggest mindset shifts you can make in medical school is this. Stop asking yourself, how do I avoid making mistakes? Start asking, what is this mistake trying to teach me? That single change in perspective can completely transform the way you learn, because every wrong answer contains valuable information. It tells you exactly where your understanding is incomplete. It points you toward the concept you need to strengthen. In other words, mistakes are not the enemy. They're part of the learning process. The students who improve the fastest aren't the ones who never get questions wrong. They're the ones who are curious enough to find out why they got them wrong. There's another reason many intelligent students struggle, and it's something that often goes unnoticed. They study in isolation. Now, don't get me wrong. Independent study is important. Medicine requires hours of personal reading, but learning becomes much more powerful when you discuss concepts with other people. Have you ever tried explaining a disease to a classmate only to realize halfway through that you couldn't explain it clearly? That moment is incredibly valuable, because if you can't explain a concept in simple language, there's a good chance you don't fully understand it yourself. Teaching forces your brain to organize information. It exposes gaps in your knowledge that silent reading often hides. That's why many of the best students don't just read. They discuss, debate, ask questions, and explain concepts to others. Learning becomes active instead of passive. And speaking of questions, here's something I wish every healthcare student understood much earlier. Never be embarrassed to ask questions. Some students stay quiet because they're afraid their classmates will think they're not intelligent. Ironically, those same students leave the classroom carrying confusion that could have been cleared up in 30 seconds. Remember this. The purpose of medical school is not to impress people. It's to prepare you to care for patients safely. A question you don't ask today could become a misunderstanding that follows you into clinical practice tomorrow. Curiosity is one of the greatest strengths a healthcare professional can have. The best clinicians are lifelong learners. They never assume they know everything. They continue asking questions throughout their careers because medicine itself never stops evolving. New research emerges. New treatments are introduced. Guidelines change. Diseases behave differently. Technology advances. The day you think you've learned everything is the day your growth begins to slow. That's why humility is just as important as intelligence. Medical school also tests something that many people underestimate: consistency. Think about learning medicine like filling a bucket with drops of water. One huge bucket of water poured in once a month might overflow and be wasted. But adding small amounts every single day eventually fills the bucket completely. That's exactly how your brain works. Studying consistently for 1 or 2 hours every day is often far more effective than trying to study for 12 hours the night before an exam. Your brain needs time to strengthen memories. It needs repetition. It needs sleep. It needs opportunities to retrieve information again and again. Learning isn't an event. It's a process. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: your worth is not determined by one examination result. Yes, grades matter. Exams matter. Clinical assessments matter, but they do not define the kind of healthcare professional you will become. Some of the most compassionate doctors, skilled nurses, outstanding pharmacists, and exceptional therapists weren't always the highest scoring students in their class. What set them apart was their willingness to keep learning, to remain humble, to care deeply about their patients, and to never stop improving. So if you're listening to this after failing an exam, struggling with a difficult subject, or wondering whether you're good enough for medicine, remember this: one difficult season does not define your future. Your journey isn't over because of one setback. Every page you read, every concept you finally understand, every patient interaction you learn from, and every mistake you grow through is shaping you into the healthcare professional you're becoming. Medical school was never designed to be easy. It was designed to transform you. And sometimes transformation is uncomfortable before it becomes rewarding. Keep learning, keep asking questions, keep thinking critically, and most importantly, keep moving forward. Because intelligence may help you get into medical school, but persistence, curiosity, discipline, and genuine understanding are what will carry you all the way to becoming an excellent clinician. As you continue this journey through medical school, I want you to remember one final thought. Years from now, your patients won't ask how many marks you scored in your second-year pathology exam. They won't know whether you finished first in your class or barely passed a difficult course. What they'll remember is whether you listened, whether you cared, whether you noticed the subtle clues everyone else missed, whether you treated them with respect, compassion, and professionalism. And that's the real purpose of medical education. Yes, you need knowledge. You need scientific understanding. You need clinical skills. But above all, you're learning to care for another human being at some of the most vulnerable moments of their life. Never lose sight of that. Whenever studying becomes exhausting, whenever the workload feels impossible, and whenever you begin to question yourself, take a moment to remember why you started this journey in the first place. Every lecture, every practical session, every ward round, every late-night study session, and every difficult examination is preparing you for a responsibility that few professions carry, the responsibility of protecting human life. That purpose is bigger than any temporary setback. So don't measure your progress by perfection. Measure it by growth. Are you understanding concepts better than you did last month? Are you asking better questions? Are you thinking more like a clinician than you did before? If the answer is yes, then you're already moving in the right direction. Success in medicine isn't built in a single semester. It's built one concept at a time, one patient at a time, one lesson at a time, and one day at a time. Keep showing up. Keep learning. Keep improving. Your future patients are counting on the healthcare professional you're becoming today.